welcome everyone. Wonderful to see all of you here today, at least via chat. Looking forward to today's session. So let's get started. Again, for those of you just joining, I am Joyce Garippa, Director of Content at Reagan Communications. Thrilled to be here today for What's Next, 2023 Internal Communications Report Findings in partnership with Haiilo. Before we get started with our program, some housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A function to ask our speakers any questions. This will be a highly interactive session, so please do use the Q&A for comments and questions. And everyone who knows me on webinars knows that I do check the chat, so I will look in there for questions as well. Within 24 to 48 hours, you will receive a survey. Once you have completed that survey, you will have access to all the slides and bonus materials and the recording from today's session within 3 to 5 business days. So do be on the lookout for that survey, and I will remind you again later. Now, on with today's program. Haiilo turned to comms thought leaders, just like all of you, from every industry in all parts of the world, polling pros with the ability to see around corners and know how to use those insights to shape the future. Today, Brad Whitworth, Haiilo's Senior Advisor of Strategic Services, will be joined by Jennifer Waugh, Chief Storyteller of Forwards Communication, to present the diversity of ideas and perspectives learned from the findings and the trends that industry leaders say are most likely to continue to impact the comms function through 2023. Brad and Jennifer, go ahead, turn your cameras on. The virtual stage is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Joyce. And I guess, Jennifer, the first thing we should start about is what's the weather like where you are in North Vancouver, BC?
Well, I'm going to mess with everyone and use a Celsius since I'm in Canada. So it's, I think, going to be a high of 25 Celsius, which is, I think, up around upper 80s Fahrenheit. So it's absolutely gorgeous fall weather here in Vancouver.
Yeah, and I'm coming your way from California wine country, where we'll be in the 80s Fahrenheit with sunny skies and the end of the harvest season going on around here. I want to thank everybody for joining us. A really amazing turnout, and you saw Keila Flores' name from Haiilo as part of that intro. Unfortunately, Keila couldn't join us today. She ended up catching laryngitis, which sort of sidelined her from being able to be a participant in this one. So the two of us are going to carry on. And if you haven't heard of Haiilo, it's an organization that empowers you as a communications person to reach, engage, and understand what's going on with your workforce. So if you're new to Haiilo, we are really the leading employee communications insights advocacy platform with measurable business impact. Haiilo has more than 800 customers around the globe, trying to reach more than 2 million employees every day. So with that, we wanted to let you just give you a little bit of background about this great communications connection, the research that we did, and then we'll sort of dive into what does it mean and where's it going from there. So the idea behind this was, instead of waiting for the brand new year to come around and getting all those sort of New Year's resolutions and what's in the year ahead, the folks at Haiilo said, why don't we just find out what's going on now? And this was along about April or May. We sent out a survey to a lot of people. The other part that was really fun was we, at the IABC International Conference in June in New York City, polled the audience there with some of the same questions. So instead of a few people going off and determining what's next and what's important, it really is really asking you, the people on the front line in communications, what do you see as some of the trends? What's coming on? So we're going to talk about some of those things, from employee engagement to change management to budgets. I will also say that we don't have crystal balls here. We don't have Ouija boards. We don't have magic 8 balls. But I would say that the communications crowd in general and large have something that puts us ahead of many others in organizations. And that's the ability to actively listen to our employees and the rest of the world and hear what they're saying. And then the ability to connect some of these disparate dots and the networks that are inside organizations that help us make that change from one thing to the next. So with that as sort of the intro, I thought maybe I would say, if you haven't seen the report, there is this internal communications trends in 2023, and I was the one who had a chance to compile all this data and great ideas from all of you from around the world. But the first thing I want to do is talk to Jennifer a little bit about something that has been a major part of all of our lives, which is managing change. And I would say that one of the biggest trends that we have seen was that before we were sort of the sidelines reporters on change. Somebody would call us in and say, you need to help us communicate that. We've become a little bit more active participants, and that's what the survey data showed, that we're going to be playing a strategic role in making sure that change takes place in organizations. So Jennifer, do you want to sort of jump in and sort of say what you've seen as some of this new role for us?
Sure, Brad. I recall being on perhaps a similar type of professional development webinar of some kind early on in COVID, and saying what I still believe, which is this is our time. This pandemic really shone a spotlight on communication professionals and gave us an opportunity to show our value in different ways that we hadn't had an opportunity, that some of us hadn't had an opportunity to, perhaps in our organizations. But the reality was, and still is, that communication professionals were absolutely essential to helping our communities, both internally and externally, move through what was an unprecedented time. And I'm pleased that at least from my observations in my client organizations, I'm seeing that shift continue and get some stickiness. And so there are just some reporting lines that are very gently shifting to engage communication professionals, who are then in turn in a position to engage our employee communities in a different way than we ever have had the opportunity before. And honestly, like, it sounds so hokey, but I am just like so excited. You and I both, Brad, have seen a lot of stuff in our career, and I really believe this is the open door we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, and I think some of it comes back to building some of those relationships early on. We've been called upon to do everything from simple change management. I would also say that change management can take various sort of forms of life, everything from a relatively simple thing to huge, things like mergers and acquisitions that are just huge in an employee's life. It could be a relatively minor thing in terms of an adaptation. So I think we need to figure out where we play best. But to me, it's the ones that are huge that we need to get involved with. And sometimes what you find is that there's a program office that is managing some major project of some sort, and we need to get plugged in to sort of be aware who the players are from the very beginning, but also to make those relationships so that they ask us to come up with a communications plan. I've been surprised so many times when I think project management people are a little bit better at having that structure, that wherewithal, and figuring out there needs to be a communications plan as much as there needs to be here are the steps that we're going through to enable change. But so often I've seen a communications plan drive a change program. So we've played both roles, but I think the problem has always been that we're called in too late. And so my recommendation is find out who these people are, start building the bridges, get involved with things. One of the beautiful organizations that I belonged to at one point had a business continuity planning team, and they're the ones who did disaster planning and crisis communications planning, crisis plan. I got involved far before crises happened to be able to happen that. The same thing is true with program management. And I also sort of go, what are the big careabouts that a CEO is looking at? What are the big changes in an organization that they see? And are you plugged into where the action's taking place? And how do you get on board with that? So finding the right people, getting plugged in is critical. But how do you find out who the key players are, Jennifer? Because I know you work with lots of organizations, have to come in and sort of quickly assess an organization and figure out how to get things moving for you. How do you find the right players?
You know, Brad, I'm glad you mentioned a few specific roles within organizations that I, over the last, again, worked for a long time in communications. And over the last, about 5 years ago, I came in on a very, very large transformation project with a client. And first of all, I have always appreciated those who are trained in project management, but they are our gold right now, and they are my strongest point of alignment with most of my current client organizations. And the project managers who hold those formal roles and who take the time to understand the communications function are a huge part of what's going to help shift us. The other alignment that happened with that project, and I have good friends and colleagues who worked in change management, again, as a formal role for many years. But what I've noticed is the integration of change management and communications on those large projects in ways that are really about us making each other shine, and each function shine more than it would without the other. After I had worked on that large project, I went to work in another client organization that didn't have an alignment between those two, specifically change management and communications. And I said, hang on a second here. We need to rewind, and me and this person need to put our heads together, come up with a plan, and then we'll get back to you about the ways we can, that this really is going to unfold. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, Brad, that you mentioned is, this notion that, let's be honest, in many situations, a communications plan has actually been called upon to double as a business plan, let alone a change management plan. In those situations where we have been fortunate to be brought in related to a business need, which is what we all want, right, early on. I've been in numerous situations where the business itself has not been able to articulate, and they're looking to communications to help flesh that out from a strategic perspective. And so I'm pleased that those elements are being taken into account more than they were alongside change management, so that we literally are all working toward the same goal.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a great point. I think sometimes we have a forcing function that we perform in an organization where, in our efforts to sort of be inclusive and find all the right players and find out, who are the tertiary audiences and who the secondary, we'll sometimes come back to some of these project leaders and say, this group thinks it's this group thinks it's this, it can't be both. Here's what I think. What are you guys planning? What are you thinking? And sometimes we surface issues that just didn't occur, because I think the other thing that we bring is a little bit more discriminatory look at some of the audiences involved in change management, where perhaps, to wind the clock back a little bit, some of the project management people sort of look at it as a one size fits all, or that what it is that they're doing is so important that everybody wants to be involved with this and understand it in its complexity. And the answer is usually not. Unless it affects you directly. And there are things like, moving an organization, be it across town or to another country, messing with somebody's paycheck and how they're being paid. Those are the kinds of things where I definitely think communications people should be involved, even though they look like relatively minor kinds of things. Oh, the facilities people will worry, real estate people about the move. You don't have to worry about it too much. They've got it all taken care of. They know how to do this. It's like we bring the human touch. I think sometimes it just doesn't happen otherwise.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you look at, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the correlation between change management principles and communication principles. And when you look at the actual, the not to get technical, because I'm in kindergarten still on this topic, but when you look at the ProSci model for change management that takes you through the ADKAR model, which stands for awareness, Okay, so the A is for awareness. You know, who better to raise awareness than communication professionals? It's our words and our channels and our key messages that help raise awareness so that people can then move through this change management process. The D stands for desire. Again, like an absolutely essential partnership in the ways that we can help generate desire and movement forward. The K is for knowledge. And again, one is not whole without the other. The A is for action, and that's where the rubber hits the road and we are helping our businesses. And then the R is for reinforcement and reflection, which again, we play a strong role in. And my passion for storytelling really comes through in all of those elements too. So it's just these are essential partnerships for internal communications.
Yeah, I will fess up to the fact that I took a process management class many, many moons ago. I'll also say that I'm glad that I don't necessarily have to do this every day for a living. I much prefer doing what it is that I do. But I think having been through that class, it gives me a much deeper appreciation for the skill set that the people going and leading process management programs have, the program management office. But I think the thing that we can do is sort of bring them back down to earth sometimes and deal with that real world surrounding. I think the other part is in some ways empowering them, because the other piece that I've often found is sometimes the change management people are changing things on behalf of another group. So it's to really get that whole circle together working as a team. So you don't expect communications just to come in and patch things up for you. You know, we're going to figure out how to make things work and find a way to go grassroots on a lot of things so that you've got active participation from a lot of people. I think the other one thing that I keep coming up with on change management, and you hit it so squarely, is that let people know as much as you can, as soon as you can, in some way, that whole awareness part of things. So often people want to put that campaign together with a launch date and we're going to tell everybody everything. And that's like the last thing you want to do with many change management efforts. I think you want to build the case for it, and that takes time and sort of a grassroots effort as opposed to we're announcing today. In fact, I sort of blew that one on a client at one point, was, we're announcing today a problem and here's the solution and here's why you're going to love it all. And you can't come at everybody with all that all at once.
Well, no. And, you would know this better. So I'll give you this as a little platform because you dove deeper into the report, but the report that you worked on actually mentioned that element of all of us. Like, let's just get human here for a second. The reason many of us have been drawn to communication. Sorry, I'm just getting a lot of static there for a moment. The reason many of us have been drawn to communications is because of that element of listening, of tapping into our audiences, understanding that there are audiences and that we need to listen to them differently. We need to apply the same principles of listening, but so that ability to really have our ear to the ground and understand our internal audiences in a more refined and segmented way is increasingly important. I teach business communications at the University of British Columbia, and I probably every single lecture has a reinforcement of that idea of listening to our audiences, even for them with me and them with each other. And it's a basic principle, but never been more important.
Well, let's sort of segue from that to that whole idea of sort of the metrics and what's important and listening to our audiences. And there's a huge effort these days to drive employee engagement, to look at the numbers, to find out. We have been reading in the all sorts of business publications and communication, public relations efforts about quiet quitting and unengaged employees and all that sort of fun stuff. And I think that a lot of people look to communications people to solve employee engagement issues. And I'm not sure, again, we're the ones who can solve it all by ourselves. But I think one of the things that you and I have been huge believers in is metrics, and engagement metrics are relatively new, although in some ways they may have been around forever. At one point, we used to call them employee satisfaction scores. So the same general idea, but where do you see employee engagement tying into everything else that's going on, whether it's a change management program or just work as we know it today?
Good question. I am seeing a few clients shift the definition of engagement for the first time in a while, and in this new way of working, from actual physical hybrid models of showing up for work, right through to our expectations connected to retention and recruitment. I just finished a big culture project with a client, and or we're coming near the end of it, and we were talking about embedding some related questions in the engagement survey, and in fact, they, those are standard questions, right? But in fact, they are adapting and adding on with regular pulse survey questions in ways that let us create a baseline, so that we know, so that culture is a nebulous thing in many organizations, that development of new values and the storytelling that goes on around that. But at least when we have a baseline and can understand what do people understand right now, and then measure again with a pulse survey or follow-up engagement surveys, we know how we're moving the needle or not.
Yeah, and that's critical. I think one of the things that you and I have both done a lot of is judging communications awards program. And one of the things that we're demanding of communications people now is prove that you have moved the needle in some way, shape, or form, and not just metrics that talk about hits or the number of people that have read something or what have you, but in very meaningful ways that matter to senior leaders. Find out what that business imperative is and find out how you're moving things. One of the scary things to me about engagement is that it's a very, very soft, fuzzy thing that people have a difficult time defining, just as difficult as how do you define the culture of an organization. And when people start chasing some magic number as their overall goal, we want to have our engagement score reach this. I'm a little bit petrified, because I think that that's sort of like saying, I want my body temperature to be 98.6 degrees. Well, it's a number and it's a sign of good health, but there are a lot of other things that my body needs to know about, whether my blood pressure, my weight, or a lot of other things besides the temperature. And if you're just chasing a number, I think it's a little bit, I want to say, short-sighted on the part of communications people and others. So one of the things that I've been telling some of my clients and organizations that I've been working with is, you got to do that measurement that you're talking about. You got to have the before, you got to have the after, you got to have things in between, you got to have the long term, measuring things over time, but you also have that short term, right before and after an event. But more important than that is sort of like we're the ones who need to connect the dots. In fact, I'll throw this challenge out to the audience. I would love somebody to be able to put it together sometime and send it to me, because I think it's a brilliant idea, but I just don't have the smarts to be able to pull it off. I would love to see somebody put together this beautiful timeline, and along the timeline are some communication things that we do, but also other things like, what was the employee turnover rate at certain points? When were some major announcements being made by senior leaders? What was the stock price doing? What was our sales like? What was our profit like? And just sort of put all these things online and then see if there's some sort of a correlation between some of the things that we're doing in communications and sort of those outside. Now, we may be reacting to some of this stuff. We may be a leading indicator in some places. We may be a following indicator. But I think the idea of looking at that bigger picture, nobody else is going to do it. It's going to be up to us as communications people, and we need to have those metrics. What was the Glassdoor rating for our organization, and what was that over time? What were some of those internal metrics, like the turnover rate for the employees? So I would challenge you, one, to find somebody. If you don't know stats really well, don't go off and take a stats class necessarily, but befriend someone who knows how to look into employee survey data, and you be the one as a communications person who's inquisitive enough to sort of push for that. Don't just give me the surface sets of numbers. Let's dig a little bit deeper. How does that group react to compared to this group? What are the follow-on questions that come from being able to start to see some of these surface things? What are the trends that lead us to that? And I think the other part that you and I have both seen, and we've all experienced, is that it's different by geography. It's different by job titles. It's different by industry. And so while numbers are great, it's also important to sort of dig in behind the numbers and find out what's going on with these metrics.
Well, I think you're bang on, Brad. And I think one of the things COVID did was, in fact, laser focus us all in on this very primal, a set of very primal needs to do with our in some cases, our very survival. But in the case of communication professionals, to do with the survival of our businesses. So, and that's why we became as necessary as we were and are, because the very survival of our organizations depended on it more than it ever had. And so what was important at that time to those who pay our paychecks and my consulting invoices was that bottom line. And you're right, engagement has been traditionally a softer measurement, although I'm full of respect and appreciation for those who have linked engagement to productivity, to increase sales, all of those things. But at the same time, we need to be, especially now with the workforce, doing what it's doing, we need to be looking at those bottom line recruitment and retention numbers, and what's our turnover rate, and what's the expense for that to our companies. So I think that's really important. Tiny little anecdote. A number of years ago, I worked on a book project, a corporate history book project for a client, and it really was about capturing that company's 50-year kitchen table history. With some founders who had been around a long time and were quite elderly. And the intent was, it was a bit of an ego project for the company's founders, and they admitted that. But at the same time, they wanted to be sure they were passing on these, again, kitchen table values to the next generation of workers. And so we set about with what we felt was strong storytelling related to that. And we had some measurements in place. When we did, one of the compelling stories was around a helicopter crash that one of the founders had been involved in, that rippled through the entire company early on. And it was a sad and personal anecdote and part of company lore. When we went to do the post-project survey, we asked all the usual engagement questions, about the degree to which you're more likely to stay with the company, say good things about the company, recommend the company, et cetera. And someone on our team suggested we throw in a safety question. And because obviously occupational health and safety is depending on your industry, can be a huge indication of productivity and profitability. And that response blew us away and was a total surprise, because in fact, something like 82% of employees said they were going to work more safely and pay more attention to safety as a result of reading this book that partly related to this anecdote. So look for the areas where you might not expect to measure, but that do have an impact on your organization's bottom line.
I think that's one of the things that we do well. I worked at Cisco for a while, and the CEO at the time, John Chambers, used to have this expression about being able to see around corners. And while I don't think, again, we have the Ouija board to be able to do that perfectly, I think that we do have this ability to connect dots and we see trends early on. And so to be able to figure out what are some of these things, I think the other piece that is so interesting to me is, yeah, those, what are the numbers like, and are they getting better, getting worse? And we may be the ones who are telling the complete story, because I think I've said for a lot of time that we tend to look at all these audiences and across the organization with the same perspective as very few people. The legal people are looking at one thing, the finance people are looking at one thing, the HR people are looking at something else. We tend to be the people who look at that broad horizon and bring it all back together. And so I think we do have this interesting, sort of important key role to play. And we have to be the masters of the numbers to be able to do that. But that's just one aspect of leadership in communications. And maybe we can segue to this next topic, which is the idea of what are we looking for in leaders in internal communications these days? What does the leadership role look like for internal comms? And these are some of the comments that we got back in the Haiilo survey that we got from all of our respondents around the world, of both internal communications people themselves, you and me and the people in organizations doing this, as well as CEOs as the heads of the internal communications process. I mean, in a sense, they're players as much as we are, maybe even more important. So
Yeah.
yeah. And the one that I really like that gets back to what we were talking about is that the last box down in the lower right, which says more heart than head focused. I think that's one of the big outcomes of the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, we have perhaps never been called on more to show our empathy to our audiences, and to really understand that everyone's showing up with some with some potentially hard things in the background of their lives, and as are we, and so bringing our hearts to work is something, again, that's a little bit of a shift within organizations, and let's face it, once you've seen a VP doing a Zoom call with their unmade bed behind them because they're juggling the rest of the family around them, you can't unsee that. And it makes us see each other as more human and more rooted in the rest of our lives in a sort of a blendy way that I've always valued and pursued. But I think within organizations there have been more divisions in that way that really got broken down. And yeah, I'm noticing a lot more communications hugging.
Yeah, and I would add on to that. I also think that many senior leaders moved away from the need for a meeting about leading a meeting and put together a briefing book for me, or give me a slide deck that I can go through everything. And they did speak a little bit more from the heart, because in some ways the pandemic was this giant leveling exercise where we were all facing some of the same sets of issues, both on that personal front and then on the professional front, the how do we do things. And I think related to that is, and we sort of talked a little about change management, but I keep thinking about all the different industries. We didn't really talk about the hybrid workplace and some of the issues that brought up, but that is, I think, one of the things that we're all going to have to deal with is where do we work? But I also say that's something we've been dealing with from the very, very beginning. If you are in a construction trade business, your job site is where you go to do work. You can't sort of dial that in from home. If you are an airline pilot, you probably are in a seat doing your job. You can't do that from home. However, some industries saw some amazing changes. I think of the medical profession, which, it's like I've got that cough thing and I'm getting the congestion. Could you just order me up one of those zithromycin Z-Packs and I'll pick? No, we need to see you in the office. And then all of a sudden they changed. It's like, no, we don't want you coming near our office. Talk to the doctor on a Zoom call and we'll take care of things. So we've seen a lot of change just in the way work is done. And I think we have seen a willingness for people to change methodologies, to be more open. And a lot of that comes from being willing to listen more so than just talking. And I think that's true of senior leaders. And I think it's also true of communications people who have put together programs that are really geared toward, two-way communication or three-way communication, where historically, perhaps, and maybe one of our downfalls was we were really just sort of moving information out to people in a one-way fashion. And we really had to make sure that we found ways to do the two-way, three-way, multi-directional thing. And especially when we were relegated to doing things as we are today in two dimensions.
Brad, I'm gonna mess with you here because I know you're fiddling back and forth with slides, but can you bring that slide up again? Because there was something in there I wanted to for us to follow up on, and I want to make sure we're covering what's so valuable about this report. The proactive thing, yes, thank you for prompting me. Again, I'm just seeing a little more. It's sort of that at the table element that communication professionals are often looking for, but the proactive relationship building in all directions within organizations, I'm seeing as a more powerful element and within internal communications. We've talked about some of those partnerships, but I'll go back to saying, like, this is our time. And so the opportunity to actually speak up and create those partnerships, I think is really valuable. But you probably have more from the research you saw in the report.
Yeah, well, and you're right about proactivity. I mean, we beat ourselves up as a profession for not necessarily being as proactive as we need to be. And some of that comes from, I think, our roles of waiting for things to be decided before we're able to communicate things. And we talked a little bit about that when we talked about getting involved with the change management crowd and being at the front end of the change and not necessarily at the back end of the change. I think the other thing, though, that I would sort of, anytime somebody said, oh, yeah, we need to be more proactive, I also say we as a profession are great at being reactive and maybe better than most people in the organization at being able to react. So, I'm proud to be part of a crowd that knows how to, again, quickly read the situation, quickly figure out how to communicate to which audiences in the best way, shape, or form, and sort of be proactive. And I think the other part is that we have got the backs now of the senior leaders who relied upon us during the worst of the pandemic and who still are a key part of it. I'm just looking at the number of times that the one that I love most in the industry right now, a trend that I see that didn't really show up exactly in the report, but executive communications and internal communications, and to a certain extent, the rest of communications being more closely tied, and especially that executive and internal communications. Because executive communications used to be speech writing and aimed toward the outside, and internal communications was all that soft employee stuff. And in the last 2 years, it's become one, especially when there weren't a lot of outside people for the execs to talk to. I think we have seen execs recognize the value of that internal audience. And so I think we can come along and prove that we understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish in an organization, but that close tie and us becoming more proactive and coming in with the solutions and the directions as opposed to waiting for people to come our way. We deserve the seat at the table, and I think we've proven that we can do the right thing. I was working with a global tech company at the time COVID broke out, and actually this company had an operation in Wuhan, China. So I actually saw some of this stuff coming early on, and I felt as if we were able to be much more proactive just because reading those signals and then making sure that people were aware of what was going on and how it impacted everything from travel to, doing business to, how manufacturing operations are going to take place, how you did customer support. We were probably 3 to 4 months ahead of a lot of US based companies just because we had that global presence. We were pretty lucky in that respect, I think.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that skill at we often give being reactive a bit of a bad rap, but it's a skill that communication professionals, it's a bit of a superpower. And once again, you and I think have talked about this, that our ability as a profession to respond in a reactive and strategic way when COVID hit really did serve us well and show us up well.
Now, the one thing that's usually tied to that ability to help out is budget. And so one of the trends that did show up was what kind of an economic impact are you going to see on your internal communications effort in the year ahead? And I'm surprised, one, that the number was relatively low. 20.5% said the economic situation is going to affect budgets and strategy in 2023. It also didn't say whether it was going to affect it positively or negatively. We usually take the pessimistic view and like, oh my gosh, they're going to cut our budget. The one thing that I would say that I think communications people have become better at, and that's as we've mastered the numbers and we are able to prove that we're moving the needle, is we can go in and say, actually the last thing you want to do is cut the budget. This is when you actually need to increase your spend in this area, and here's why, and be able to go in and make the business case for things like that. Where before, I don't think we necessarily had sort of the ability to sell ourselves or our solutions or our products or our services to people. And we also, I've said it before, those of us who are trained as journalists were trained not to have a dog in a fight. It was sort of like, these people are saying this and these people are saying that. And, I don't really have an opinion. So when it comes to, oh, we got to cut your budget, it's like, oh, okay, if that's what we need to do, and I'll do whatever else everybody's doing. When what we need to actually turn around and do is say, let me tell you why you need to make the investment and make the business case. And I think we need to learn how to be better salespeople, to be able to, in bad times and good times, demand more of the slice of the pie that's being served, because we need to have that going forward.
Yeah, and the other interesting element, things change quickly, right? And so this survey was done in May, June. One wonders if that number would be higher now, even with a couple of months sort of into more dramatic inflation, the looming potential recession, those kinds of things. So yeah, it's a factor for sure. But
and we've seen companies putting hiring freezes in place, and I think we're going to. But again, that's where I think communications people can play a key role. Is look at what's going on, communicate, and try to do so in real time. It's sort of like one of the best things we can do is make sure that as we see stuff, as we hear stuff, as we hear about trends, and I think that's our version of listening. We do a good job of that, and I think we're getting better at doing it in real time, and certainly little toys like this. As long as we don't become too Pavlovian about things and overreact. I do remember very early on in my career, a very, very senior PR executive to whom I reported. I came in and said, these people are saying this, these people are saying this. We need to get this out right away. And he goes, let's wait. Let's see how big an issue this really is. Where is it widespread? Let's do a little bit more homework. And I like the fact that you're picking up some of those early signals, but let's not overreact and do things. So I think one of the skill sets we need to learn is that how do we sell, and how do we sell at the right time, finding that window opportunity and sort of sinking in with the executives and having their ear too. I was fortunate enough to work in an organization where the CEO at lunchtime would come and sit with the communications people. I think part of it was he was tired of sitting with the finance people and hearing numbers all day, and we were the storytellers, and we loved hearing stories. We could pick his brain about what was going on, but we could also use that opportunity to plant some ideas of things that we were picking up. So find that opportunity to influence and affect when given the opportunity, even in informal settings, because that's where the power comes that we're talking about. And we've had the power all along. We just haven't learned how to harness it, I don't think.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points.
Yeah.
Back over to you. You've got some more content to cover, I think.
Well, I think we're pretty much through some of the major points. I was going to ask Joyce to see if she has been getting any questions coming in, to see whether there's stuff going on in the chat room that we haven't been looking at, because I've been trying to do the slide thing and reading my notes on a few ideas. So Joyce, have people got
I'm back.
questions about
I'm
what we've been
back.
saying?
Careful what you wish for.
Okay.
I am back. So there was a question in the Q&A, and then I actually had some questions, Brad, around the survey, because I did have a chance to look through some of the findings. So you'll amuse me. You mentioned that this person's asking, you mentioned wanting communicators to share metrics that prove that they're actually moving the needle beyond its. I'm in a position where I don't get a lot of metrics to work with, so I'm very much still learning. What kinds of metrics are you talking about?
Well, I think the first question becomes, what are the business issues that the organization is facing that you as communications people can solve? Jen, you hit on one when you talked about safety. If safety is an important part of the business, how does the company measure safety? And, is it lost days? Is it, the number of days since the last accident, or, whatever the metric is on that. Our good friend, Jim Schaefer, also another IABC fellow, talks about being able to go into a production facility and finding ways to save $1.5 million by a team working together, because that kind of number wakes up people in the senior leadership. So I think the first thing is, what are the careabouts? In general numbers, and I think one of the places where we do have sort of an ongoing role to play in partnership with our HR friends is in that whole employee engagement, job satisfaction, willingness to recommend this is a great place to work. And if you can't ask the question yourself in a pulse survey that happens like after a town hall meeting, if you can't ask that in a once a year employee survey that is administered across the organization, find ways to do it on the fly. One is, I've always said, go read Glassdoor ratings, because those numbers done by an outside company, and you can filter out sometimes the disgruntled people who've left. You can find just the people who've stayed, who've talked about your own organization. Use some outside numbers. Find somebody in HR who can give you numbers like employee turnover rates. What is the percentage of people that are leaving because they're dissatisfied, and is that number changed? Is it going up or is it going down? So there are ways that just by going and asking the right kinds of people, you can come up with some hard and fast data that, again, may correlate to things. The pushback I always say is that communications usually can't solve all those things, but we need to tie our communications efforts to being able to prove that we are part of the effort to be able to move things. And that's one of the disciplines that, Jennifer, you and I see when we evaluate communications awards programs. People make this, here are the objectives. Here's what it is that we're trying to solve as an organization. Here's how communications can help, and here's how we're going to measure it. And then they come at the back end and say, and see, here are the numbers, and this is what we did.
Mm-hmm. And then just to jump onto that question for the audience member who asked it from a very tactical perspective, everything from some of the approaches Brad's describing to readership surveys of your intranet. I've worked with clients, very small organizations, where they've developed a small readership council. So literally kind of a cross section of representative employees who are giving feedback on the intranet or whatever communication tools there are. And maybe that's as much as you can do. We do what we can.
And I think, if you look at a tool like we've bought to by Haiilo, Haiilo has some built-in metrics. I think many employee communications platforms today have tools that let you track some of the things that you're doing and come up with numbers, and more important even than some of the raw is helping you analyze. I mean, people are beginning to plug AI into things to be able to help give you the insights to see trends that are emerging in the communications field as well. So I say a lot of it is just have that innate curiosity about the metrics and the numbers. I also at one point did a presentation to a lot of sort of middle managers and senior managers in an organization about some numbers, and I got all sorts of great questions. And being, that was, I'll call it a fairly easy to answer environment. Before I was grilled by some senior leaders, it was nice to have all those questions coming in from a lot of people. So as you find data, go and try it on people and say, hey, I've learned this, this, and this. And then they ask more questions. And it's that peeling back the layers of the onion and getting more and more tied into, here are the numbers that people care about, and here's how to answer the questions. Since again, that's not necessarily the number one skill set that most communications people bring, or what's required in job descriptions and you read them. Usually is mastery of measurement is not up at the top as much as, great at writing, great at storytelling, great at this, that, and the other. So, and what I say is go to a conference, find somebody who's talking metrics and sit down on that session. If that's not your strength, make it one.
Well, preferably a Reagan conference. I'll throw that in there too. Shamefully, right? Shamelessly, I guess. But there is another question from the audience, and then I did want to go back and ask you some questions about the survey and the importance of well-being and how internal comms plays a role in that. But this question is, in today's economy, we see so many companies having to do hiring freezes or even layoffs. What kind of advice do you have for those of us that are tasked with shaping the leadership comms to staff and the need to balance between transparency and maintaining employee morale with messaging constraints coming from the higher ups? The challenge comes, of course, when you see staff execs as just towing the party line. So any advice you can give our audience member here on shaping that comm strategy?
I'm always going to go for transparency and an advocacy for that. And organizations, again, the research shows that organizations that promote transparency and live by the values behind that will do better in the end. I get it. The reality is you're juggling, and and sometimes those higher ups don't necessarily want to share everything. And I think I think that's an element of transparency, to say we're sharing what we can right now. We're not comfortable sharing more, in the same way that you would with, for those of us who are parents, with your kids and with your, with your closest friends. We are going to generate more trust when we can say what we know.
I'll also add too, Brad, I know you had a wonderful visual in your slide deck that had this sort of 6 ideas, and I just jotted down 3 of them earlier, and it was helping leaders be more empathetic and focus more on active listening, as well as more heart than head focused. And I think that plays a role here in the question being asked.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head too. It's all about, that's tied to that employee well-being. Before we sort of didn't care, we put in an employee assistance program, or we take care, we got complete benefits. You don't worry about things, we got you covered. But it's also spending time listening to what it is that's going on in people's lives. And I think we had an opportunity to experience that all as we went through a couple of years of oh my God, my life is upside down, and being empathetic to someone and recognizing people in different situations. Somebody was leading school classes in their living room and trying to do their job at the same time. Some people who didn't have kids didn't have that issue, but they had other issues. Some people were in a house where they had plenty of room. Some people were in a studio apartment where they couldn't go outside, didn't have a balcony, couldn't escape. So I think we became more sensitive to, it's not a one size fits all, which is where we have historically come from in internal communications. Part of it was we never had the budget to be able to segment and look at audiences. But I think when you were talking about even something like layoffs, the recognition that we need to parse information for different audiences. Clearly, if there's a work group that is most impacted by a set of layoffs as opposed to it across the board, you figure out a way to communicate to them. But the other one I'm always reminded of is we very rarely spend a lot of time communicating to the people who are left behind, who are having to pick up on some of the extra work because the rest of this organization got decimated. So I think the using the head and heart in equal parts as opposed to pure head is going to be one of those skill sets that, one, I think communications people are good at, and two, being able to figure out how to sell that is going to work. And I think the other part is we have compatriots in HR, the people functions. In fact, what's interesting to me is seeing the number of organizations that are moving away from calling it human resources to people, the people organization or the chief people officer. It shows that they are concerned about us as humans, not just as a resource.
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question from the audience, and there are a couple here in the Q&A. And the one I'm going to take actually goes back to one of your slides, and that talks about budget and our looming recession and economy, and how there may be some strains on budget. We do research here at Reagan all the time as well, and we find that most communicators are consistently asking for more budget. So I'm going to go ahead and do the budget question here. How can communications professions better make the business case for our function within a healthy organization? It seems like comms functions can find it difficult to show, especially with metrics, the worth of our roles. And because of that, we're the first to experience cutbacks.
I think it goes back to Brad's point about making sure that we are linking to the business objectives, because I think sometimes the framework that many of us have grown up in looks to show value for the communications outputs rather than looking at the business outcomes. So when we can create a link, the light bulb kind of goes on more readily with with those who are making those kinds of decisions, in my view.
Yeah, and I think if you ever want to hear chapter and verse again, Jim Schaefer, one of our IABC fellows, talks a lot about that's where as communications people get down in the weeds in an organization and help empower a specific work group accomplish a goal that might be saving a lot of money, and being able to show that, you know, through better, improved communications. And it doesn't have to be, I think, you know, often we look at this communications as this top-down hierarchical, we're up here in corporate trying to drive things and set the environment. But it's just as important to be able to create that communications environment where in each little bubble, each little part of the organization, they are using interpersonal and, you know, mass communications things most effectively to be able to accomplish whatever it is that their business goal is, whether it's selling, whether it's constructing, whether it's delivering healthcare, you sort of name it. And we need to show how we can help in those little bubbles just as much as we can. Oh, there's this big message and we help get it out to everybody so that they all heard it at the same time. It's important. You need to do both that big picture stuff so that people see the context, but you also have to help with making sure that it transpires at that local level so people have an idea of how they are impacted and how they can help move the organization forward, even in difficult times.
Perfect. Well, Brad and Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. For our audience, as a reminder, I said this earlier, thank you all for being here. Within 24 to 48 hours, you will receive a survey. Once you have completed that survey, you will have access to the recording, the bonus takeaways, and you will find in the chat the download link for this report. So do take note of that. You'll get that survey again within 24 to 48 hours, and then access to all of this within 3 to 5 business days. On behalf of Reagan Communications and Haiilo, thanks for being with us today. Have a great rest of the day.